The night they told me to leave, I was standing in the kitchen holding my phone. Not to call anyone, just holding it the way you hold something when your hands need to be busy while the rest of you figures out what's happening. My mother was at the counter with her back to me. My father was in his recliner in the living room, the TV on, the volume set to whatever level means he doesn't have to engage. My sister Kira was in the hallway doorway. One hand pressed flat to her sternum, her face arranged into something soft and stricken and very, very practiced. I looked at my phone. Then I picked up my bag and walked out the front door. But that's not where this story starts. Let me go back 3 weeks. It was a Tuesday in October. I know it was a Tuesday because the recycling bins were still sitting at the end of the driveway. My father forgets to bring them in every single week, and I bring them in every single time I visit. I grabbed both handles, wheeled them back up the gravel path, and walked inside without knocking. I stopped knocking about 4 years ago. Nobody noticed. The kitchen smelled like soy sauce and something scorched at the bottom of a pan. My mother was at the stove with her back to me, stirring a pot that didn't need stirring. On the counter next to her, propped against the paper towel holder, was her phone screen on, playing a true crime podcast at low volume. "You don't have to do that," she said, still not turning around. The bins, I was going to get them. She wasn't. I said nothing. This is something I want you to understand before anything else. I am not a dramatic person. I don't hold grudges the way some people collect them, organized by year and offense. I'm a project manager at a logistics firm in Naperville. I live by spreadsheets and timelines, and the question is, what's the most efficient path between here and there? When something bothers me, I tend to note it, file it, and move on. The filing system had gotten full. I just didn't know that yet. "Kira's upstairs," my mother said. "She's not feeling well." I opened the refrigerator and pulled out the salad dressing she'd asked me to pick up on the way. Ranch. The kind in the squeeze bottle. I put it on the second shelf, behind the jar of pickles. "What is it this time?" I asked. It came out wrong. I meant it clinically, genuinely asking. But my mother's shoulders shifted, just slightly, just enough. Her head. "Since this afternoon? Has she taken anything?" She doesn't like to put things in her system. I closed the refrigerator. So, the ranch dressing went on the second shelf. Kira had a headache. My mother's shoulders were set like someone preparing to absorb impact. And the podcast on the counter was describing, in great detail, how a woman in Ohio had ignored 18 warning signs. I started setting the table. "I want to tell you something about my sister's headaches. I want to tell you with all the charity I can manage, because I do believe that pain is real even when you can't see it, and I was raised by a woman who told us both that constantly. But Kira's migraines had developed, over the years, a remarkable quality. They arrived at the precise moment when there was something nobody wanted to do, and they lifted, reliably, about 20 minutes after the thing had been done by someone else. She was 26 years old. She had the immune system of a Victorian child in a particularly gloomy novel. That night, she came downstairs for dinner looking translucent, holding the banister with both hands, and positioned herself at the table in a way that I'm being precise here, not unkind, could only be described as arranged. Head tilted, one hand loose in her lap. My father got up from his recliner and adjusted the dining room light without being asked. My mother served Kira first. I served myself. "How was your day?" my father asked. It took me a moment to realize he was asking me. "Good." The Henderson account finally closed. "Good," he said, and turned back to his plate. My mother was cutting Kira's chicken into smaller pieces without Kira asking her to. Kira accepted this without looking up, her eyes soft, her expression the particular texture of someone suffering gracefully. I watched my mother's hands on the knife. Careful, deliberate. The way you cut food for someone who needs you. I'm a decent cook. I've been cooking my own meals since I was 14, because 14 was when I figured out that waiting for someone to notice you were hungry was its own kind of diet. I know how to break down a chicken, but nobody had cut my food into smaller pieces since I was maybe 5 years old. I'm telling you this not to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because the filing system was getting full, and I just kept adding files. After dinner, I washed the dishes. My mother helped Kira upstairs. My father brought his plate to the sink, set it inside the pot I was still scrubbing, and said good dinner the way you say good weather, a statement about conditions, not a compliment. I finished the dishes, wiped down the counter, turned off the kitchen light. My phone was on the counter where I'd left it before dinner, face down, the way I always set it when I'm somewhere that makes me want to be somewhere else. I picked it up. There was a text notification. Kira's name. I opened it, expecting something about the drive home, or whether I'd left my umbrella upstairs. We'd had that mix-up last month. But the message wasn't about any of that. It wasn't meant for me at all. Mom, she was doing it again tonight, just sitting there making the air heavy. I couldn't even eat. I'm sorry, I know you're tired of hearing this, but I don't know how much longer I can do this. I read it twice, then a third time. The kitchen was dark. The podcast on my mother's phone had ended while we were eating, and nobody had started another one. I stood in the quiet and read the message 4 more times, and on the 4th time, something happened in my chest that I won't call any of the words people usually use for things like this. It was heavier than anger, more patient, like something settling in for a long stay. I didn't reply. I didn't call Kira upstairs to say this came to me by mistake. I didn't walk up to my mother's room and knock on the door. I did something I had never done before in my relationship with my sister. I took a screenshot, and I put the phone in my pocket. Then I gathered my things, said goodnight to my father, and drove back to my apartment in the dark. I remember thinking, halfway down the highway, that I should feel something larger, some tidal thing. But the truth was, all I felt, the most honest word I have for it, was confirmed. Like a number you've been recalculating for years, and you finally find the original receipt. And there it is, the actual figure, exactly what you'd estimated, exactly what you'd hoped you were wrong about. I wasn't wrong. And I hadn't known yet, sitting in my car on Interstate 88 at 9:15 on a Tuesday, that I would have 15 more screenshots before the end of the month, and that one of them would be the one that changed everything. What I haven't told you yet is what I found when I got home that night and sat down with my phone and opened Kira's contact, not to call her, but to look. Just to look. Because that screenshot was the first one. But it wasn't the first time I'd had the feeling that I was reading something that had already been written about me, somewhere, without my knowledge. That part comes next. I didn't open the folder that night. I drove home, made tea I didn't drink, and sat at my kitchen table with my phone face up in front of me, like it was something that might move. Then, I went to bed. Then I lay there for 2 hours staring at the smoke detector on the ceiling, until I gave up and went back to the kitchen and opened the folder. One screenshot, Kira's name at the top. The timestamp, 7:43 p.m. Mom, she was doing it again tonight. Just sitting there making the air heavy. I couldn't even eat. I'm sorry, I know you're tired of hearing this, but I don't know how much longer I can do this. I read it again in the quiet of my apartment, and here is what I noticed on a second reading that I hadn't caught in the kitchen. I know you're tired of hearing this. Tired of hearing this. Not I know this sounds repetitive. Not sorry to keep bringing it up. Tired of hearing it, which meant there had been enough instances, enough prior conversations, enough of a pattern, that my mother could reasonably be described as tired of it, which meant this had been going on long enough for fatigue to set in. I put the phone down, looked at the tea, picked the phone back up, then I went to Kira's contact in my messages, found the thread, our thread, the one where we texted about Christmas plans, and whether Mom wanted a gift card or something personal, and whether I was coming to her work thing last spring, and I scrolled, looking for any message that looked like it might have been for someone else. There was nothing. Just us. Normal sister conversation with all the warmth of 2 people who shared a bathroom for 6 years and had agreed, at some point, to call that family. She'd sent it to the right person. She just thought the right person was our mother. I went back to my screenshots folder, pressed my thumb on the image, and deleted it from my text messages. The way you erase something you were never supposed to see. The way you make it so the person on the other end never has to feel that particular shape of embarrassment. The one that comes with realizing your private thoughts took a wrong turn and ended up in the wrong hands. I don't know why I did that. I'm still not entirely sure. Maybe it was habit. 28 years of making things easier for everyone in that house had worn grooves into me too deep to see. What I do know is that I kept the screenshot, and I didn't tell Kira it had come to me. I want to be honest with you about something. When I was 9 years old, my sister spent 8 months in and out of Children's Memorial with something the doctors described, at various points, as a chronic digestive condition, a functional GI disorder, and finally, just Kira's stomach. She was 6. She was small for her age, and she cried during blood draws, and she hated the hospital smell. She told me once it smelled like the inside of a thermometer. And she was genuinely sick. I want to be clear about that. The pain was real. The fear was real. My parents' fear was real. What was also real? During those 8 months, I made my own lunch every day. I did my homework at the kitchen table and checked it myself. I learned to set my own alarm. I learned that if I was quiet enough, still enough, useful enough, I took up exactly the right amount of space, which was almost none, and things ran more smoothly for everyone. I was 9. Children learn what they're taught. I don't blame anyone for the lesson. I just want you to understand that by the time Kira came home from the hospital, something had already been decided about how our family worked, and nobody had to say it out loud for all of us to know it. I think about that a lot now. The things that get decided without anyone deciding. The screenshot stayed in my phone for 3 weeks. I went back to my parents' house twice in that time, once for Sunday dinner, once to help my mother with something on her computer. Both times Kira had some variety of headache. Both times I washed the dishes. Both times I drove home afterward and sat in my parking lot for a few minutes before going inside. And I couldn't have told you exactly why, only that the apartment felt more like mine than the house did, which is a strange thing to feel about a place you grew up in, and a strange thing not to feel about a $1,200 a month, 1-bedroom in Naperville. The second screenshot came on a Thursday. The third on the following Monday. By the end of that 3-week stretch, I had 11. I hadn't gone looking for them. I'd set up a notification for Kira's name, out of some instinct I didn't examine too closely, and twice more she'd sent messages meant for my mother that landed instead in my inbox. The other 8 I found the old-fashioned way. She forgot, at some point, that I was her contact for our family group chat, and the autocomplete on her phone apparently did not distinguish between Mom and Diane as reliably as she believed. I kept every one. I deleted each message from my inbox immediately afterward. Kira never knew. The night everything changed was a Friday in early November. My mother called me that afternoon and asked if I wanted to come for dinner. She said they were making pot roast. She said my father had been asking about me, which was the kind of thing she said when she meant she had been thinking about me and wanted company. I said yes. I brought a bottle of Cabernet from the Target on Ogden because my mother likes Cabernet and I like giving her things she actually uses. Dinner was fine. Dinner was exactly what dinner at my parents' house always was. My father ate quickly and retreated. My mother asked about work. Kira appeared 20 minutes late with her hair done and her color high, which meant the headache had made a full recovery sometime around 4 in the afternoon. Afterward, my mother was rinsing dishes and I was drying, and Kira had gone upstairs, and my mother said, in the voice she uses when she's been rehearsing something, "Diane, can I talk to you for a minute?" I put down the dish towel. My father came in from the living room. He didn't sit down. He stood at the edge of the kitchen with his hands in his pockets, looking at the floor, and I understood in that moment that whatever was coming had been discussed without me, probably many times, probably over a long enough period that they'd arrived at something like consensus. My mother said it plainly. I'll give her that. She didn't dress it up. We think it might be better for everyone if you found somewhere else to stay. For a while, Kira has been having a hard time, and her doctor says the home environment matters for her progress. And we think some space might help. I stood there. My father looked at the floor. From upstairs, I heard nothing, which meant Kira was standing very still. She gets sick, my mother said, quieter. When you're here, she says she doesn't know why, and I believe her. We have to think about her health, Diane. There were 12 things I could have said. I know because I counted them later, sitting in my car, the same way I count things when I'm trying to organize something too large for my regular mental filing system. 12 things, ranging from I have screenshots of your daughter sending texts to your phone, describing in clinical detail her strategy for making this house uninhabitable for me, to something much smaller, something that would have cost me almost nothing. I said none of them. Kira appeared in the hallway doorway, one hand to her sternum, eyes soft, the expression of someone suffering gracefully and wanting very much to be seen doing it. I didn't want this, she said. I hope you know that. I looked at her for a long moment. I know, I said, and I meant it. Not the way she thought I meant it, but I meant it completely. I went upstairs, packed one bag, the essentials work laptop, chargers, 3 days of clothes, the folder of screenshots I'd moved to a separate album 2 weeks ago and backed up to the cloud the day after that, because I am, at my core, a project manager, and project managers do not leave the only copy of an important document in a single location. I came back downstairs. My mother was still at the sink, not rinsing anything. My father was back in his chair. Kira had retreated to whatever room she'd chosen for the performance's final act. I picked up the bottle of Cabernet from the counter, put it back in my bag, and walked out the front door. In the car, I sat for a moment with the engine off. The recycling bins were at the end of the driveway. I thought about going back for them. Then I started the engine and pulled out. I drove the first 3 miles without music. At the 4th mile, I turned on the radio, then turned it off again. By the time I hit the highway, I was thinking about the folder on my phone, not its contents. I had those memorized by then, but the date on the oldest screenshot. The very first one, 3 weeks ago, I would have said, but I'd looked at it again that morning, before I drove over. And the date in the corner wasn't from 3 weeks ago. It wasn't from 3 months ago. I want you to think about that while I tell you what comes next. The apartment smelled like sawdust and the previous tenant's cleaning products when I moved in 6 months ago, and I never fully got rid of either. I'd come to think of it as honest a place that didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. 1 bedroom, east-facing window in the kitchen. When the sun came through in the morning, it turned the dust in the air into something almost pleasant to look at, if you weren't in the mood to call it just dust. I set my bag on the kitchen counter, took out the Cabernet, opened it, poured a glass, and drank about 1/3 of it standing at the sink before I put it down. Then I sat at the table and opened the folder. 11 screenshots. Plus, the one from tonight, the one I'd taken on my phone in the parking lot before driving away. A photo of my mother's face, as she said she gets sick when you're here, except that wasn't a screenshot, that was just a memory, and memories don't have timestamps, which is one of many reasons I prefer documentation. I started reading from the beginning. Chronologically, the way you read a report when you want to understand the full scope of something before you let yourself react to any part of it. The oldest one first. I'm not going to read them to you word for word, but I want you to understand the architecture of them, because that's what struck me first, not the content, but the structure. Kira wrote to my mother the way you write to a doctor. Specific, dated, a clinical log of symptoms. Tuesday, she was short with me at dinner, and I had that feeling in my chest again. Saturday, she looked at me a certain way when I mentioned the promotion, and I couldn't sleep until almost 3. Last week, at Mom's birthday, she made a comment about the salad, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom. I didn't want to ruin the dinner, so I didn't say anything. The salad comment? I remember that. She'd made a pasta salad with too much vinegar, and I'd said to my mother privately in the kitchen that it was a little sharp. My mother must have mentioned it. Or Kira had been standing in the hallway where I couldn't see her, or I hadn't been as quiet as I thought. 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days was the date on the oldest one. I sat with that number for a while. 3 years is not an accumulation. 3 years is a practice. 3 years is something you decide to do, at some level, even if the decision lives below the part of you that uses words. I finished the Cabernet. I didn't pour more. I put the phone face down on the table, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. In the morning, my father called. His name on the screen, 7:52 a.m., the same time he's been waking up since he retired from the post office in 2019. I watched it ring. I watched it stop. I got up, made coffee, and sat at the east-facing window until the dust and the light stopped being interesting. My mother called at noon. Kira called at 3:17, which surprised me. Kira almost never calls. She texts, she finds phone calls confrontational. She told me that once, and I'd thought at the time that it was an interesting thing to believe when you are, yourself, the primary source of confrontation in most rooms you enter. I watched her name on the screen until it went to voicemail. She didn't leave one. That was day 1. On day 2, I called Aunt Ruth. She picked up on the second ring the way she always does. Like she's been expecting you regardless of when you call. Like she's simply been doing something nearby and is happy enough to stop. I got asked to leave, I said. A pause. Not surprise, Ruth processes before she speaks, which is a quality I've always trusted. When? Last night. Where are you? Home. My home. Good, she said, and meant it plainly, without irony, which is also something I've always trusted about her. Then, how are you doing? I'm reading some things that are helping me understand the timeline. Another pause. I'll come Saturday. Unless you need me before. Saturday is fine. I want to tell you about Aunt Ruth, because she matters to this story, and because she's been largely absent from the version of this family I've described to you so far, which is itself a kind of information. She's my father's younger sister, 61 years old. She lives 40 minutes north of here in a house she bought herself after her divorce in 2009, the kind of clean, deliberate house that announces a decision has been made about the rest of one's life, and the decision is, no more noise I didn't invite in. She taught high school English for 22 years. She knows how a narrative is constructed. She knows the difference between what a story says it's about and what it's actually about. She and my father don't speak. Haven't for 10 years. When I asked her why once, she said only that they'd had a disagreement about what the truth was worth, and that she decided she wasn't willing to keep arguing about whether it had any value at all. I never told my mother I still saw her. My mother would have said something about keeping the peace, and I would have had to explain that peace maintained by omission isn't really peace, it's just a room where people have agreed not to mention the smell. On day 3, I started organizing the screenshots by category rather than date. This is the kind of thing I do. I am not apologizing for it. I am made, at some fundamental level, of the belief that if something can be organized, it should be, because a pile of facts and an ordered sequence of facts are not the same thing, even when they contain identical information. The order is its own kind of argument. I made 4 categories. Things Kira said about what I'd done. Things Kira said about how I'd made her feel. Things Kira said that I could verify against my own memory. And things Kira said that bore no relationship to any event I could identify, which was a category I found particularly instructive. The one in that last category that I keep coming back to, even now, even after everything, is this. She chews so loudly I can't think. I know that sounds so small, but it makes me physically ill to be in the same room. Like an actual response in my body, Mom. I've looked it up, and I think it might be a real condition. We had soup that night. With spoons. I want to be fair to Kira. I want to be fair to her specifically, because fairness is the thing she did not extend to me. And I think it matters that I extend it anyway, not for her benefit, but because the kind of person I want to be on the other side of this is not someone who became smaller in the trying. I know that she was genuinely sick as a child. I know that the version of love she learned from our parents arrived in the form of attention, and that attention arrived most reliably when there was a problem. And that she was 6 years old when she learned that, which is too young to be blamed for the lesson even if you're old enough. Eventually, to be responsible for what you do with it. I know all of that. I knew it then. What I also knew by day 4, sitting on my couch with the categorized folder and a yellow legal pad where I'd written dates and cross-referenced them against my own calendar, was that Kira had sent my mother 47 messages in 3 years and 4 months. 47. Some of them were nothing practical things, real complaints. The texture of a sibling relationship that has friction in it because all sibling relationships have friction in it. I'm not pretending I was easy to live alongside. I am precise and I am quiet, and I take up a certain kind of space that some people find comfortable and others find like a window left open in winter, technically letting in air, technically a problem. I know I'm not. Nothing in this story. I'm not telling you I'm nothing. What I'm telling you is 47 messages in 40 months, and in not one of them did my mother write back. Have you thought about talking to Diane directly? Not one. My father called again on day 5. My mother on day 6. Twice. On day 7, Kira called again, and this time she left a voicemail. And I know what you're thinking, and no, I didn't listen to it right away. I set the phone on the counter and made dinner, real dinner, the kind that takes 40 minutes and dirties 3 pans, the kind I never made when I was spending 2 or 3 evenings a week at my parents' house, filling a role that nobody had formally assigned me, but everyone had come to rely on. I ate at the table. I listened to the voicemail afterward. Kira's voice was soft, a little rough at the edges, the way voices get when someone has been crying or wants you to believe they have. Diane, I just want you to know, I didn't want it to go this way. I know you're angry. I would be too. I hope you know that I love you. I hope you know it wasn't about not loving you. I set the phone down. What she said was true. That's what made it so hard to hold. It wasn't about love. It never had been. That was precisely the problem. The whole architecture of what she'd built was never about whether she loved me or didn't. It was about whether I existed in a way that left enough room for her. And the answer she'd arrived at, slowly, carefully, over 3 years and 4 months and 47 messages, was no. I picked up the phone, called Ruth. Saturday still works, I said. But bring coffee. I'll bring the good stuff, she said. The date on the oldest screenshot, I said. You're going to want to see it. How old? I told her. The silence on her end lasted about 4 seconds, which for Ruth is the equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. Bring the whole folder, she said. Ruth arrived at 10 with a thermos of coffee from the Ethiopian place on Main Street, and the specific expression she gets when she already knows something is bad and is simply waiting to understand the dimensions of it. She sat at my kitchen table. I put the phone in front of her, folder open, oldest screenshot at the top, and I went to the window while she read. I didn't watch her. I looked at the parking lot below and counted the cars until I heard her set the phone down. Okay, she said. Okay, sit down, Diane. I sat down. She poured coffee into both mugs without asking which one I wanted and pushed the closer one toward me. Then she picked up the phone again and kept reading. I drank the coffee. It was very good. I focused on that. When she finally set it down for the second time, she didn't say anything immediately. This is one of the things I have always loved about Ruth. She treats silence as a legitimate response, rather than a gap to be filled. She sat with the folder for a moment the way you sit with a bill that's higher than you expected, letting the number become real before you decide what to do about it. 3 years, she said. 3 years, 4 months, and your mother never... No, she nodded, turned the mug in her hands. Tell me about the worst thing you actually did. I looked at her. I'm not asking to defend Kira, she said. I'm asking because you know there's something, and I'd rather hear it from you than find it between the lines. She knows me. That's the thing about Ruth. She taught English for 22 years. She has read more narratives than most people encounter in a lifetime, and she knows the difference between a protagonist who is entirely without fault and one who is simply honest enough to say otherwise. 5 years ago, I said. Kira borrowed my car without asking and put a scrape on the rear bumper. She didn't tell me. I found it on a Sunday morning when I was heading to the grocery store, and I went back inside, and I was loud about it. In front of my mother and whoever else was home at the time. How loud? I don't yell. But I was very clear, and I didn't modulate for the audience. And she cried. Ruth waited. And I didn't apologize the way she wanted me to. I apologized for the volume. Not for being angry. Were you wrong to be angry? No. But she was 21. And she'd scratched my car, and she was crying, and I kept being precise about it, which probably felt worse than yelling would have. I wrapped both hands around the mug. That's in there. Message 14. The way she describes it, I attacked her in front of the family. But what I did was refuse to make it smaller than it was, and she experienced that as an attack. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then, so she took something true and built 47 messages around it. She took something true and built a medical history around it. The word medical landed in the room between us with a particular weight. I hadn't said it out loud before. Saying it to Ruth, watching her face understand the full shape of it, was the first time I let myself acknowledge what I actually knew. This wasn't simply a sibling who found me difficult. Kira had been describing my presence in her life as a physical illness, had given it, in her messages to my mother, the language of symptoms and flare-ups and recovery times, had made my existence something that required management. She's in therapy now, I said. Dad mentioned it. Her therapist apparently agrees that the home environment is affecting her progress. Ruth set her mug down with a precision that meant she was choosing not to say something. What? I said. A therapist can only work with the information they're given. I nodded. I'd thought about that too. Thought about Kira sitting in an office somewhere, telling the story the way she'd been telling it to my mother for 3 years. The architecture already solid, the details already selected and arranged. Thought about someone trained to listen hearing that story and having no way to know what had been left on the cutting room floor. "Can I ask you something?" Ruth said. "Yes. When did you know?" "Not suspect. No." I looked at the thermos on the table. The parking lot outside had gotten quieter. Somewhere in the building, someone was running a vacuum. "The day of the first screenshot," I said. When I read it and I thought, "I know you're tired of hearing this." That phrase. I knew then that I was reading the middle of something, not the beginning. And before that, I thought about the dinner table, the recycling bins, the dish towel, the specific quality of being in a room where your presence is tolerated rather than wanted, which is a texture so familiar you stop registering it as unusual, the way you stop registering the sound of traffic if you live near a highway long enough. "I think I've known for a long time," I said. I just kept filing it under, "This is how families are." Ruth looked at me steadily. "Is that what you still think?" The vacuum in the building stopped. The parking lot was still. The east light was coming through the kitchen window at the angle it gets around 11, the one that makes the dust visible. I thought about the 9-year-old who set her own alarm and checked her own homework and learned to take up exactly the right amount of space. I thought about her deciding one afternoon with no witnesses that this was simply the shape of love, and that the shape was her fault, and that if she got small enough it might eventually change. It hadn't changed. I'd gotten very good at small, and it hadn't changed anything. "No," I said. "I don't think that anymore." Ruth nodded once, the way she nods when something has been settled. She picked up her mug. I picked up mine. Outside, a car started in the parking lot and pulled away, and the space it left was just a space, not an absence. Just room. "So," she said, "what do you want to do with the folder?" I'd asked myself that question every night for a week. I'd turned it over the way you turn over a tool you've never used before, trying to understand what it's for, what damage it can do, whether you're the right person to be holding it. "Nothing yet," I said. "I'm not doing anything with it yet." Ruth nodded again. She understood the yet. My mother called on the 8th day, not the 9th, not the 10th, the 8th, which told me she had lasted exactly as long as she could before the discomfort of the situation outweighed the discomfort of making the call. I answered. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, honey." A pause, the kind with furniture in it. "How are you doing?" "Fine. Working." "Good. That's good." Another pause. In the background, I could hear the faucet running, then stopping. She was in the kitchen. Of course she was in the kitchen. Your father's back has been bothering him. He threw it out moving something in the garage. He should see someone about that. You know how he is. I did. Tell him to call Dr. Merrick. He still has the number. I will. The faucet again. Briefly. Then, "I miss you, Diane." Not "I'm sorry." Not "I've been thinking about what happened," or "I'm not sure we handled that correctly." Just "I miss you," which is true, I believe, as far as it goes. My mother misses the function as much as the person, and I don't say that with cruelty. She is a woman who experiences love most fluently through proximity and routine, and my absence had disrupted her routine, and that disruption registered as missing me, and on some level those things are the same. On some level, "I miss you too," I said, because it was also true, as far as it went. She invited me to dinner the following Sunday. She said she was making pot roast, which was either a coincidence or an olive branch disguised as a menu item. I said yes. I wrote the date on my calendar in pencil, which I recognized, even as I did it, as a small and private act of self-preservation. Sunday dinner was quiet, in the way that things are quiet when a room full of people has agreed to focus on the food. My father talked about the garage and the back, and eventually Dr. Merrick's office, which had apparently already been called. My mother had made the pot roast correctly, the way she always makes it, with the pearl onions that take forever to peel, and that nobody but her would bother with, which is a form of love I recognize, even when it's the only form available. Kira arrived 22 minutes after I did. She came through the door with her coat still on, cheeks flushed from the cold, and she stopped in the kitchen doorway when she saw me. Something crossed her face too fast to name, the way something briefly surfaces in water before going back down. Then she smiled, opened her arms, "You came," she said, as though my being there was a gift she hadn't expected. I stood up and let her hug me. She held on a beat longer than necessary, her chin on my shoulder. And I put my hands on her back and looked at the wall above the stove and thought about nothing specific. The pot roast smelled good. The kitchen was warm. Outside it was 31 degrees, and the Pearl Jam my neighbor plays on Sunday mornings was not audible from here. "I'm glad you're here," she said into my shoulder. "I know," I said. She pulled back and looked at me with something soft in her expression, and I looked back at her. And the thing about Kira is that she is genuinely good at this. The warmth, the openness, the quality of attention that makes you feel, for a moment, like the room has oriented itself toward you. It's not entirely performance. She contains it alongside everything else. The way most people contain contradictions, the way most of us are capable of being exactly what we claim to be in some moments and something else entirely in others. I helped my mother bring dishes to the table. Kira poured wine. My father told the story about Dr. Marek's receptionist, who had apparently recognized him from the post office and given him an earlier appointment, which he told with the satisfaction of a man who has discovered that 30 years of reliable mail delivery has practical applications in retirement. It was, objectively, a pleasant evening. I ate the pot roast. I drank 1 glass of wine. I helped clear the table and wash the dishes while my mother dried. The same as always, the same positions we'd always occupied. Kira disappeared upstairs around 8. I said goodbye to my parents, hugged my mother, and went to get my coat from the hook by the door. The coats are hung near the bottom of the staircase. Above me, on the landing, Kira was on her phone. She didn't know I was there. I'd come from the kitchen, not the living room, and the stairs are carpeted, and I was in socks. I wasn't trying to listen. I want to be clear about that. I was reaching for my coat. "No, it was fine," she was saying. Her voice was low and easy, the voice she uses with people she doesn't have to perform for. She came to dinner. It was whatever. Everyone was being very a pause. A small exhale of air that was almost a laugh, careful. I held my coat in my hands and did not move. I know. It's just, look, if it's always going to be like this, me managing every room she walks into, then eventually something's going to have to change again. I can't keep doing this indefinitely. A pause while the other person spoke. "No, I know. And if it happens again, I know what to do. I've thought about it. It's not complicated." She moved on the landing above me, and I stepped back, silently, into the dark of the hallway. "Anyway, it'll be fine. Let me call you later." I put my coat on. I went back to the kitchen, said goodnight to my mother a second time, and walked out the front door. In the car, I sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. The recycling bins were in. Someone had brought them in. Maybe my father's back permitting, maybe Kira, maybe a version of the family that functioned correctly when I wasn't inside it to disrupt the atmosphere. I thought about it's not complicated. I thought about I know what to do. 3 years and 4 months of documentation, and she was already planning the next move. I started the engine, put the car in reverse. "Here is what I want to ask you, and I want you to actually think about it rather than answer immediately. If you were sitting in that car, with that folder in your phone, and that voice still in your ear, what would you do? Would you go back inside? Would you call someone? Would you wait and see? The way you wait and see with weather systems and difficult conversations and things you hope will resolve themselves without your involvement? I'd been waiting and seeing for 3 years and 4 months. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. Some decisions don't feel like decisions when you make them. They feel like the only available direction, the way a river doesn't decide to move downhill. By the time I reached the highway, I had already stopped asking myself what I was going to do, and started asking myself only one thing. When? 2 weeks passed. I went back to work, went back to my routines, went back to the particular discipline of behaving normally when normal had become a category I was revising from the inside. My mother called twice a week, always in the evening, always from the kitchen based on the background sounds. We talked about my father's back, which was improving. We talked about a pipe under the sink that had started making a noise. We did not talk about Kira, which meant we were talking about Kira in every silence, every redirect, every careful selection of topic. I became fluent in that particular language years ago. I spoke it back to her without effort. Then my father called on a Wednesday. My father does not call. He answers calls. He participates in calls that have been placed by other people, but in 32 years of being his daughter, I could count on one hand the number of times he had picked up his phone and dialed my number with intention. So when his name appeared on my screen at 6:45 on a Wednesday evening, I understood before I answered that this was not about his back. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, kiddo." He cleared his throat. He always clears his throat before he says something he doesn't want to say. "You got a minute?" "Sure." So, another throat clearing. "I don't want to get in the middle of anything." "You know I don't like getting in the middle of things." "I know, but your mother thought I should be the one to tell you so." A pause. "Kira's been seeing someone, a therapist. She's been going since, I don't know, since before everything happened, apparently. And the therapist she's saying that the environment at home is part of what's been affecting Kira's progress. That stress in the home environment has a measurable effect." That's how she put it, measurable effect. "And she's recommending some changes." "What kind of changes?" She thinks, this is the therapist talking, not us. She thinks it would be beneficial for Kira to spend more time in the house, alone, with just your mother and me, while she's working through some things. I was in my kitchen. I sat down. "Dad, I know how that sounds. Does she know who she's describing? Does the therapist know there's a second daughter? Diane, I'm asking seriously." "She knows what Kira has told her," he said, and his voice was quiet and a little tired, and I understood that he was telling me the truth in the only way he was capable of sideways, hedged, in a form that let him believe he hadn't fully said it. The therapist knew what Kira had told her. 47 messages, compressed into sessions. Curated, arranged, already shaped by 3 years of practice into something that sounded like a patient describing symptoms, and not like a narrative someone had been constructing for years. I thanked my father. He said he was sorry. I believed him. After we hung up, I sat at the table for a while. The east window was dark by that hour. The neighbor's television pulsed through the shared wall, a laugh track at irregular intervals, someone else's idea of what funny was. Ruth called me that night. I told her about my father's call. "A measurable effect," she repeated. Those were the words. She's taken it to a professional. A professional who has one source. Ruth was quiet. Then, very carefully, "How are you?" I thought about it. "I'm not sad," I said. "I want you to know that." I thought I would be, but I'm not. I think the sadness already happened, somewhere in the middle of reading those messages. And what's left now is something else. What kind of something else? The kind that knows what it's doing? Ruth said she would come again that weekend. I said she didn't have to. She said she knew she didn't have to. It was 2 days after that conversation that Kira posted something on Facebook. I don't follow Kira on social media. I made that choice quietly. And without announcement about 2 years ago, the same way I'd made several choices quietly and without announcement, but we have mutual friends. And one of them, a woman named Patricia, who I went to high school with and who means well in the blunt, unfiltered way of someone who has never learned to consider the audience, sent me a screenshot with the message. "Did you see this?" The post was 3 paragraphs about healing and boundaries, and the courage it takes to protect your own energy. It was written in the first person with the specificity of someone describing genuine pain, and underneath that, I could see the structure, the same architecture I'd been reading for 3 weeks, just formatted for public consumption instead of private delivery. The profile photo had a soft filter on it, the kind that smooths everything slightly, that adds a wash of warmth to whatever it touches. It had 53 likes, several comments saying, "You are so brave, and this is so important," and sending love. I looked at it for a long time. Then I put my phone down and started washing the dishes I'd left in the sink from dinner. And about halfway through, I laughed not because it was funny, exactly, but because there is a specific quality to watching someone perform their suffering for an audience of people who have no reason to question the performance. And that quality, at a certain remove, has a texture that is almost comic. Kira had put a soft filter on her grief and called it healing. She had done it in public. She had 47 private messages and 1 lightly edited Facebook post, and she didn't know, sitting in whatever room she'd written it from, that both were now in the same folder. I called my mother the next day, asked if we could talk. "Just the 2 of us," I said. "At the house." She said yes, of course. Come Thursday after work, she'd have dinner ready. I thanked her and got off the phone. Then I sat down and thought about my mother in that kitchen. The podcast playing at low volume. The pot on the stove that doesn't need stirring but gets stirred anyway. The phone propped against the paper towel holder. Screen on. Her hands getting wet. The way she always puts it on speaker when her hands get wet. I'd known that about her for 32 years. I'd just never before considered how useful it was. My mother had pot roast on the stove again. I don't know if she chose it deliberately, or if it's simply what she makes in November, but the kitchen smelled the same as it had 3 weeks earlier. And the similarity had a quality I couldn't quite name, not comfort, not irony, something in between that didn't have a word. She looked tired. That was the first thing I noticed when she opened the door. The particular tiredness of someone who has been managing something invisible for too long. We sat at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of tea, and talked the way we'd learned to talk over the phone these past weeks carefully, in the uncontroversial middle of things. My father's back was almost fully recovered. The pipe under the sink had been looked at. She'd been to her book club and hadn't liked the book but liked the company. Her phone was on the counter behind her, propped against the paper towel holder. The podcast was playing, the same true crime channel as always, a woman's voice describing a timeline of events in the careful, neutral tone of someone assembling facts for an audience. My mother's hands were dry. She held the mug with both of them. We talked about the book club for a while, about the woman named Paulette, who brought the same spinach dip every month regardless of theme. Then, she turned to check the pot roast and her hands went into the water in the sink. And her phone was right there, and the habit lives in the body after 32 years, and she hit the button without thinking about it at all. The podcast went to speakerphone. She turned it down slightly. Her hands stayed in the water. I wrapped both hands around my mug. 7 minutes passed. We talked. The pot roast needed another 40. Paulette, apparently, also had opinions about wine pairings. Then my mother's phone lit up on the counter. Kira. My mother glanced at it, then at me. Something moved across her face, not guilt, closer to apology. She reached for it. You can get it, I said. She hesitated. Mom, get it. She picked up the phone. Her hands were still wet. She hit accept the same way she always does. Hi, baby, she said. Kira's voice came through the speaker clear as anything. The kitchen is not a large room. Hi, is this a bad time? No, I'm just making dinner. Okay, good. I just wanted to check in. I had my session today and we talked about some stuff and I've been thinking about it all afternoon. How did it go? It was good. Hard but good. She wants me to start thinking about what I actually need. Like specifically, not just in general. What I need to feel safe at home. A pause. And I've been thinking about it, and I think one of the things is I need to know that if things start feeling the way they were feeling, you'll listen to me. Like actually listen. Not just I don't want to have to convince you every time. I hear you, my mother said. Because the progress I'm making in there, it's real, but it's fragile right now. That's what she keeps saying. Fragile. And the environment at home needs to support that, not work against it. And Kira exhaled. I want to know that you're on my side. I'm always on your side. You say that, but then she comes to dinner and everything just... A shift in her voice, subtle, the loosening that happens when you believe you're in a private conversation. It just goes back to the way it was. She just sits there and takes up all this space, and everyone adjusts to her without even realizing they're doing it. And I'm supposed to be healing, and instead, I'm just managing. Again. Still, my mother turned from the sink. She looked at me across the kitchen. I looked back at her. Kira kept talking. I love her. I want you to know I'm not saying any of this because I don't love her. But there's a difference between loving someone and being able to be in the same room as them. And I've been trying to explain that for so long, and I need someone to finally believe me. I'm not making this up. I'm not being dramatic. She makes me feel like I'm disappearing and I don't think she even knows she's doing it. Which is almost worse, you know? It's like trying to explain weather. My mother's hands were at her sides. She looked at me for a long moment. I didn't move. I didn't offer her anything, not reassurance, not permission, not an exit. I just sat there at her kitchen table with my tea going cold and let the room hold what it was holding. She reached over and picked up the phone. She set it down on the table, face up. Kira's voice continued from the speaker. softer now, moving into something that sounded like resolution. And I think the next step is probably talking about what family gatherings look like going forward. Because I can't keep, my mother said quietly, into the phone on the table, "I need to call you back." She didn't wait for an answer. She ended the call. The kitchen was very quiet. The pot roast made a small sound on the stove. Outside, someone was pulling into the parking area, headlights crossing the window for a moment and then gone. My mother sat down across from me. She looked at the phone on the table between us. "How long?" she said. It wasn't a question exactly. It was the beginning of understanding. I reached into my pocket. I put my own phone on the table, folder open, oldest screenshot at the top. 3 years, I said. 4 months. My mother read slowly. I watched her, the way you watch someone open. Something that can't be closed again. Not with satisfaction, not with dread, just with the particular attention of someone who understands that what is happening is permanent and should be witnessed correctly. She didn't react to the early ones. Her face stayed composed through the first several, the way faces stay composed when the mind is still organizing what the eyes are reading. Then she reached one, I don't know which one. I didn't watch the screen, and her jaw shifted slightly. She kept reading. When she finished, she put the phone on the table and looked at the window. Her own phone buzzed. Kira's name? She let it ring. It stopped, then started again. She picked it up. "I need some time," she said. "I'll call you later." Kira said something I couldn't hear. My mother said, "I know. I'll call you later." Then she ended it and put the phone face down and left it that way. We sat in the quiet for a while. The pot roast made occasional sounds on the stove. Neither of us moved to check it. "She was sick," my mother finally said. "When she was small. You remember." I remember. I think I never stopped reacting to her like she was still sick. She said it carefully. "The way you say something you've understood for the first time only seconds ago." Every time she said she wasn't well, some part of me was back in that hospital room. And I didn't question it. I didn't let myself. I nodded. "That's not an excuse. I know it isn't." She looked at me directly for the first time since she'd set the phone down. Her eyes were dry. My mother is not a woman who cries easily, which I have always understood as something we share. "I didn't know she was sending me those," she said. "I mean, I knew she called. I knew she talked to me about you. I didn't think of it as a record. A pause. I should have told her to talk to you. I should have said that every time. I didn't. That's on me." "Yes," I said. "It is." She absorbed that. She didn't argue it. We heard the front door. Kira came into the kitchen, still in her coat, her eyes moving from our mother to me and back again, doing the rapid recalculation of someone who has walked into a room that contains the wrong combination of people. The expression she'd been composing on the drive over, I could see the remnants of it. The readied softness didn't have an audience to land on. My mother's face was still. Mine was nothing in particular. Kira looked at the 2 phones on the table. "Mom," she said. Soft. A beginning. "Sit down, Kira," my mother said. The way she said it was not unkind, but it was not the voice Kira was used to hearing. It was something older and more settled, a voice that had made a decision about itself. I stood up. I took my phone from the table and put it in my pocket. I took my coat from the back of the chair. I looked at my mother. "I'll call you." She nodded. I looked at Kira. She was standing very still, her hand on the back of a chair, her face doing something I hadn't seen it do before, not performing, not arranging, just present and uncertain and young, in a way that reminded me suddenly, briefly, of a girl who was 6 years old and afraid of the smell of hospitals. I understood her. I want to be clear about that. Understanding is not the same as what comes next. "Take care of yourself," I said, and meant it. I walked out. The air outside was very cold. I went to my car, put my bag in the passenger seat, and sat for a moment looking at nothing. The recycling bins were at the end of the driveway. I left them there. I took out my phone and called Ruth. She picked up on the second ring. "How'd it go?" she said. I looked at the house, one light on in the kitchen, the curtains still. "It's done," I said. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, "How do you feel?" I thought about the 9-year-old who learned to take up exactly the right amount of space. I thought about 32 years of files, all the things noted and stored and never retrieved. I thought about my mother's jaw shifting as she read. I thought about Kira's face when there was no performance left to give. Like myself, I said. For the first time in a while, I started the engine. Put the car in reverse. And I want to leave you with one question, not about Kira, not about my family, about you. Is there something you've known for a long time that you've been filing under this? Is just how things are? Because I filed things under that heading for 3 years and 4 months and 28 years before that. And what I learned, sitting in that car in the November cold, is that the file doesn't go away, it just gets heavier. At some point, the weight becomes a choice. There's something nobody tells you about families that run on one person's pain. They need a witness, not a rescuer, not a fixer, just someone willing to see clearly and stop pretending the blur is normal. If you've ever been the one who brings in the recycling bins without being asked, who apologizes for taking up space, who files things under this is just how families are, I want you to hear this. Documentation isn't revenge. Knowing your own story isn't betrayal. And leaving a room that was never truly yours is not abandonment. It's the first honest thing. Have you ever stayed somewhere long past when you knew you should go, not because you wanted to, but because leaving felt like proof they were right about you?